So I'm joined today by Professor Sujatha, who is a sociologist of medicine at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. So welcome, Professor. Please could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you for having me in this program. I'm so happy to discuss my work with you. And as you mentioned, I teach in Jawaharlal Nehru University. I'm basically a sociologist of knowledge. Though this field is not a very fashionable field today, it's a field that gives me the leverage to be able to work on sociology of science or medicine or of any form of knowledge, and to be able to make the connections between them. So my core interest is that I'm a sociologist of knowledge, so I can dabble a little bit in philosophy of science, etc. And but I have been predominantly working in sociology of health and medicine, with a specific focus on traditional medicines. And with regard to traditional medicines, I have some very specific focus areas. I've been looking at how the relationship between expert knowledge within the medicine, that's the core technical knowledge, and how the non-expert knowledge, what is the relationship? To put it simply, the physician has knowledge of the disease. The patient has the experience of the disease, but not the knowledge. The patient has a disease, but goes to a physician who has the knowledge of the disease, but not the disease. And how is this dynamics played out in the encounter between the physician and the patient in different systems of medicine? So that's my entry point. How is it played out in biomedicine? How is it played out in other systems? The expert, non-expert relationship. I also look at a little bit into the kind of shifts that's happening in these knowledges, how knowledge practices change. Sometimes the communities or the classes or the groups who are possessors of that knowledge or protagonists, they change, but the knowledge may be constant. So various permutation combinations are possible when you look at traditional knowledges. This has been one of my abiding interests. Lately, I've also been looking at what happens to these traditional knowledges when they get incorporated in the state bureaucracy, in the public health system, and so on. And also been looking at what's happening with the globalization of these Asian traditional knowledges, health-related knowledges and practices, what happens when they get globalized, and what is the role they are playing in the postmodern condition in Europe and North America. These are my interests, and my publications have over the time touched upon these issues.
Mm. Could you tell us a little bit about the different traditional medicines you've looked at?
Okay, I've basically my focus has been on. Initially, I looked at how ordinary people, experience and understand their body, disease, and health. What is normally known in this part of the earth as folk medicine, folk medical knowledge. That's not expert, but it is not lay knowledge also, because the people, communities living in, who are fending for themselves in a particular ecological zone, they develop very deep knowledge of their body and the relationship, the kind of herbs and other substances in their environment that can help or, work in their body. So this kind of knowledge was what I was looking at. I call it medical lore in my earlier work, health by the people and medical lore. And what kind of relationship does this kind of experiential, existential knowledge have with more codified and textual forms of knowledge, like Ayurveda or Siddha, which are formal, textual, professional forms of knowledge. So my point is that there is a structural pluralism in the South Asian context, by which I mean there are different levels of knowledge, they from very formal textual, which is acquired by training, medical knowledge, and a certain amount of knowledge which is acquired by experience, interest, by ordinary people, elders in a community, women who handle children, wrestlers who work on bone setting and other things, because so those kind of embedded knowledges. There is a structural pluralism. They look like different genres, but there is a continuum and relationship. So you have these kind of vast forms of knowledges which have led to bone setting and other traditions, and then you have the textual knowledges of Siddha, Ayurveda, and Unani, which are medical systems proper.
Okay.
And yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about the difference between Ayurveda and Siddha?
Yes. It's Ayurveda and Siddha. They share the same theoretical and pharmacological principles. They are basically the concepts of disease causation and the principles of their pharmacology. It's more or less the same. And many Ayurvedic texts have been translated in Tamil. But so there is also some, what is special about Siddha, and why is it that we are calling by two different names, Ayurveda and Siddha, is that Siddha is largely found in some regions of South India, predominantly in Tamil Nadu, and also a little bit outside the borders. So a large number of Siddha texts are in Tamil language, whereas Ayurveda texts are in Sanskrit. The fact that the Siddha texts are in Tamil language gives it a proximity to Tamil culture and lifestyle. Secondly, the Siddha medical practices draw heavily on the regional ecology, and that's a second point of difference. So there is, they share broad principles, but specific practices might be regional. And thirdly, and more importantly, Siddha is associated, or it at some point the medical practices got converged with or got combined with a mystical heterodox cult in South India, a Shaivite cult known as Siddhas. So Siddha is not a medical system proper. It doesn't profess to be a medical system. Ayurveda is. It is self-consciously a medical system. Siddha is, it is a confluence of these, the mystical heterodox cult, the Siddhas, as you called it, the Shaiva Siddhas, and some of their philosophies have percolated into this. So it has certain unique characteristics. There's a greater use of metallic preparations in Siddha. They are also there in Ayurveda, but in Siddha it is very prominent, and there is a very great importance given to it, because the Siddha yogis thought that herbs are perishable substances, whereas consuming metals and minerals can, experiments with metals and minerals could lead to immortal body that's not perishable. If you are what you eat, then if you eat herbs and food, your body will be perishable. So they were experimenting with recipes for immortality. So maybe, this is what some philosophers say, that so they had a greater importance given to metallic preparations. In my own fieldwork, I have observed that, in the villages, women have, I've seen women use these preparations, fairly complicated preparations using herbs and minerals at home, as for children's ailments, for other ailments, from which I understood that these practices have percolated into the lifestyle of the people. That's a third, another characteristic of Siddha, social characteristic, in that because of its proximity in terms of language and regional ecology, it is far more prevalent in the lifestyle of the people as non-expert knowledge in the sayings, folk knowledge and sayings than Ayurveda is in the north of India. But they are, so it's a matter of debate whether you'll call them two different systems or, how exactly you postulate them.
Thanks for that. That's really interesting. It's good to know the differences there. So how would you characterize the relationship between yoga, Ayurveda and Siddha as a health intervention in both Europe and in India?
Yeah, it's interesting to contrast how since yoga, Ayurveda are now present in Europe, and yoga is a very big thing outside India, and Ayurveda is also growing. It's picking up, and it does. Some studies show it is the fastest growing among the camp therapies, alternative medicines. Though it's not it's not comparable to Chinese medicine and Tibetan medicine. It's still third or something in the line, but it is one of the fastest growing among the camp therapies. What is, if you look at yoga, Ayurveda and Siddha in India, you'll find that until recently, until 2 decades ago, yoga was not as famous as it is today. A couple of decades ago, it was restricted mostly to the upper sections, upper castes of society, found among few, practiced by some teachers and taught to, which is very different from the European scenario. And whereas Ayurveda, Siddha and other such medical practices were widely found in rural areas and in urban areas, though the government, the state was quite ambivalent to it. So there is the realm of society where these traditions are widely practiced and found, and there were several traditional Vaidyas and Hakims who until the 1990s, 92 anthropologists have gone and studied them. They practiced they learned it in the old way of acquiring the knowledge. It was so widely prevalent in rural and urban areas, at least socially more accepted, though the state was ambivalent towards it. And yoga was more or less, as I told you, it had a limited kind of a clientele and it was restricted to certain sections of the population. This is the Indian situation. But when I look at the European situation, where as part of my research, I was on Ayurveda in Europe and talking to European practitioners of Ayurveda, and where I was tracking this, how Ayurveda went to Europe, I found that Ayurveda comes much later. It is yoga, which from 1900s, gradually with Swami Vivekananda's visit to the USA, it creates some ripples, and gradually yoga, already by the 60s and 70s, it is having a following and it's picking up, it's becoming popular. Ayurveda comes much later. In 1985 is the first Ayurvedic clinic started in Switzerland. So yoga is first to come, and it enters through upper middle class clientele in Europe. Ayurveda is first introduced in Europe in a big way through Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and followers of his method of transcendental meditation. So it comes in 85. But what is interesting, I noticed in my research, is that there is if you look at the Ayurveda's route into Europe, one is the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi disciples, who were many of whom were medical doctors who learnt Ayurveda. Mahesh Yogi got people, Ayurveda doctors from India, to teach allopathic doctors in Europe who were his disciples, teach Ayurveda. But that was one route. Another and very important route is the route through yoga teachers. A number of European yoga teachers, they found at some point that their clients wanted advice on diet and lifestyle. And so they often referred to yoga, referred to Ayurveda, knowledge on diet and food, and this is how the connection between yoga and Ayurveda happened in Europe. And many of these yoga teachers started Ayurveda academies and taught, Ayurveda, nutrition, Ayurvedic theory of, lifestyle. Basic Ayurveda was introduced through these yoga teachers. Another very interesting thing about the trajectory of yoga and Ayurveda in Europe is that, unlike other aspects of South Asian culture, cuisine, or dress that you find is popular and has become commodified, they came through migrants. Means Asian or South Asian migrants, they came into Europe. But the case of yoga and Ayurveda is special and unique in that they were directly absorbed by native white European populations through spiritual Indian gurus. So it didn't come through migrants. It was received. It was sought by upper middle class. I would say small town medical doctors and followers of people like Mahesh Yogi, or Indophiles who had something to find, who were interested in some aspect of Indian culture, philosophy, or religion. And so it went directly. And so I would think that there is something that yoga and Ayurveda has done, contributed to the postmodern condition, as one may put. So that's the yoga Ayurveda connection in Europe. And this is the interesting part about it. Today, and everybody knows that yoga, there's so many forms of yoga, so many innovations and traditions of yoga in Europe and North America itself. So I just want to mention one little thing. A Berliner I met him in a Kerala Ayurveda clinic when I was interviewing him. So I asked him, why wouldn't you teach yoga in Berlin? Why have you come to India? He said, I can't teach yoga in Berlin because there are at least two yoga teachers in every street in Berlin. I will not get any clients. Nobody will come to me. So I've come to India to get people here. So, I was quite, this was quite interesting, an observation.
Yeah.
So.
And has Siddha come to Europe as well? Has that come either through migrant communities or through yoga teachers, or is that not so much?
No, Siddha is nowhere at the moment in the global scene. It's more, like I told you, it is restricted to the south of India, though it is undergoing its own development, about which I will mention maybe later. But it is not globalized. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons is that it is deeply, embedded in Tamil nationalism and Tamil culture. In a way that Ayurveda is not. And Ayurveda went through the gurus there.
I see. So could you tell us a bit about how yoga, Ayurveda and Siddha are used as health interventions for either kind of improving quality of life or even for life extension?
Yes. In the way yoga, Ayurveda and Siddha, Ayurveda are used in Europe is quite different from the way and their role in the Indian situation. Though they are connected. So if I understood you wanted to know about how they are used for health in Europe and in India.
Yes, that's right, for health and then also for immortality, which you touched on a bit at the start.
Yes. See, if you see in India, you find there is a upper middle class clientele for spa and other kinds. If let's say yoga, for instance, its trajectory is slightly different from that of Ayurveda. Yoga, because it's a bodily practice, both in Europe and in India, has, even the allopathic doctors and the scientists accept yoga to an extent. Now, this is not true of Ayurveda, which is a system of medicine and which has medicines and other therapies for internal consumption. So, if you look at yoga in the clientele and the kind of in India, you have one very elite section of film stars, big elite gurus, and they attract corporate and other kinds of populations. People go and learn yoga there. But I want to mention here another interesting development in the Indian situation, that the government of India at some point in 2002 started a separate department called Ayush, which is an acronym, AYUSH. And it has clubbed together Ayurveda, Unani, Siddha, Yoga, and homeopathy. Ayurveda, Yoga, Unani, Siddha, and homeopathy. So all non-biomedical systems. And a separate department was started, and now it's an independent ministry. And with this yoga, which remained some kind of an enclave practice, the government has introduced it in the schools. And so they have made yoga, introduced it in the PT period and in government schools. And so in some sense, it's getting more democratized because of its bureaucratization. It will lose some of its uniqueness and special practices. What is only Hatha Yoga might be emphasized. It might be practiced like some kind of, gymnastic practice. But despite all the limitations of bureaucratization, I think it's a remarkable step that it's being taught in the schools, and it is moving from being something very extraordinary and unique to some section to a large section of ordinary, lower middle class children from very different background. I would like to see how many of them take to this and what happens. And you also have slightly less elite gurus like Ramdev, who through television propagated to lower middle class population, such that in a Delhi slum, I could find a woman who said, I'm practicing yoga for my backache. That's it. As far as Ayurveda and Siddha are concerned, you also have the spa kind of culture used as spa, wellness, etc. by the elite sections, by the film stars and others. But you also have a very solid foundation of a strong clinical practice. And they are dealing with injuries. Bone setting is a very important practice. The many Ayurveda, Siddha practitioners and bone setters with qualifications, and they attract a huge clientele. They attend to fairly complicated problems, both of different kinds of fractures, ligament tears, and other kind of problems associated with movement, paralysis, various other such problems. So it's a very, in this there is also a sub field called Varma Sikitsa, which is where they use something like the acupressure, the meridian points, or the vital stimulating or working on the vital points through different pressures to be able to treat certain ailments. That's also a very well developed field. And then you have these clinics. They treat. There are places which treat the bites of poisonous creatures like snakes, scorpions, all kinds of insect bites, skin ailments, burns, blood disorders, and then eye disorders of the eye. Some are treating autism, forms of paralysis. And then you have a huge section for arthritis, skin problems, infertility, impotency, and non-communicable diseases like hypertension, diabetes. But I want to tell you one thing. I should not forget it. Is that increasingly in the COVID crisis now, the COVID-19 crisis, these systems have been pressed into action. Basically, to use the allopathic language, what they call immunomodulators. They can also function in a standalone way in the management of COVID. Because Ayurveda has a theory of epidemics, and about 2,000 remedies, they say, are available herbal in Ayurveda, and Siddha classifies fevers into 64 types. There's an etiology and a protocol for these different fevers. So from these practitioners have adopted certain things, certain practices. Herbal decoctions are being distributed in quarantine centers in Tamil Nadu, and these are simple and easily accessible herbal preparations. And to some extent, if you notice the fatality rates within the Indian regions, 2 South Indian states like Kerala and Tamil Nadu have fewer fatalities. Though the cases are many, the fatalities are fewer, and among other factors like very good monitoring and surveillance, etc., the use of traditional medicine could have played an important role. At least until now, we find that though the cases are many, compared to other states, these states have a lower death rate because they are distributing these herbal preparations in all containment zones and quarantine centers to all those who have been tested positive. So this is to show that they also have relevance in the contemporary situation. Coming to Europe, the European Ayurvedic practitioners that I interviewed, they are of 2 or 3 different kinds. You have on the one very serious allopathic doctors who have learned Ayurveda and who practice both Ayurveda and allopathy, most of them from the Maharishi group. A good number of them treat, among the serious conditions, a number of skin problems. They also treat gastrointestinal problems. One person mentioned he treated facial paralysis. And a good number of menopausal syndromes, problems associated with menopause. These are among the foremost. I mean, treated in clinics. And then a host of other pains, different kinds of pains, depression, burnout syndrome, sleep disorders, and mild day-to-day problems like indigestion, constipation, and so on and so forth. So these are the kind of ailments for which they are treated. But in Europe, the difference is that they use what is known as proprietary drugs. That is, Ayurveda drugs, the classical drugs prescribed in the text cannot be used in Europe because of stringent rules. Right. So the classical drugs are in the form of oils, powders. They may have metal and mineral elements in them. This is allowed in India, so you can use them in the original as given in the classical text. But this can't be done in Europe. So the European Ayurveda practitioners use what is known as proprietary drugs, which are individual herbs isolated from the formularies, which the original formularies may have 5 to 10 ingredients. They are processed in a particular way. Here, they are all, the proprietary drugs are in tablet form, and they are just one herbal ingredient whose active ingredient has been isolated, processed in a dry form so that it is safe, and the taste is not something that the clients will not like. And these are the only ones that are permitted in Europe and North America. So that's a very big difference, the kind of drugs that are used.
Mm. And then you've touched on this a little bit, but could you say a bit about how you think India's indigenous medical systems are being kind of framed in biomedical standards?
Yes. See, that's been a very important and very widely researched issue as to how traditional systems, their efficacy, their parameters, and their conceptual framework is different, their vocabulary is different. How do they coexist with biomedicine? I think the situation is that there should be a frame evolved to coexist with biomedicine, because biomedicine cannot be ignored or brushed aside. For many reasons. But I would think that there are some areas in which the impact of biomedicine, or the influence or the use of biological tools, biochemical tools are relevant and beneficial. Some domains where they are not at all beneficial, and they would not good for Ayurveda or these traditional systems. So we have to delineate those areas and focus on them, because anyway that they have to coexist. Second point is that there should be a mutuality. Biomedical doctors should also be educated on these things. And normally in India, we find that though a personal level they accept for cross referrals, they may even go and collect the herbal decoctions, but officially they will not admit that this works or so on. Now, so one of the areas in which I found that biomedical, practices or the influence or impact of biomedicine is detrimental to Ayurveda is drug development. Like I told you, this proprietary drugs are prepared, they are like biotech products. There is the Ayurvedic pharmacological principles are not followed. One ingredient is isolated and it is being manufactured. Ayurvedic medicines have to be consumed with certain other substances like ghee, oil, milk, various, which also serve as catalysts. And the form of medicine, taste, everything is important. And 5 or 6 herbs, some of them have 10, 15, they are polyherbal preparations. Now, by reducing them to one and, making it like a tablet biotech product, in the drug development, neither are the rigors of biomedical, pharmacology being followed, nor are the principles of Ayurvedic pharmacology being followed. And very interesting research by the anthropologist Elizabeth Zhu on TCM patented medicines, proprietary medicines. She found that they are not effective. So actually, they look very nice. They are very beautiful, very clean, easy to consume. So they are, but then they will affect the efficacy of the traditional medicines, because after all, the pharmacology or the drugs and the therapies are a very crucial component of medical system and its efficacy. And here, by making isolating the active ingredient in drug development, it is in this area, this is detrimental. Secondly, in research, there is a great demand that these systems should be, following the randomized controlled trials. There are some difficulties, though many interesting studies are also there. The difficulties are Ayurvedic preparations are polyherbal and they are multimodal. For an arthritis, you don't just have medicines, but there are oil applications, and you may have some dietary restrictions. So they work together. But in a controlled trial, you can't try all of them. You have to isolate one in a control group and experimental group. So there are very many interesting experiments trying to harness the best of the controlled trials without damaging the integrity of Ayurveda. One very interesting study was conducted by Aryavaidya Pharmacy of Coimbatore in collaboration with NIH US. So these experiments are there, so that these are happening. But in research, it's not some elements. If such experiments open up, then the possibilities are good, beneficial learning. Third level in which biomedical standards are applied are in the clinic. Often diagnostic tools, blood tests, x-rays, and MRIs and other things. Patients come with these diagnoses to the Ayurvedic physician. So the Ayurvedic physician has to be able to read, understand, and speak both the languages of biomedicine and of Ayurveda. Mm. To some extent, the physicians that I interviewed said that they have to do it. They can't shy away from it. They have to do it. And to some extent, some of these tests and tools help them to visualize certain abstract physiological principles in Ayurveda. To that extent, it's beneficial. But in the public domain, often, like in the case of these herbal preparations for COVID, etc., there is a demand that there should be a scientific publication, where the benefits of mutual learning are overridden by hegemonic the politics of knowledge that you don't want to agree. You don't even go by, respect the integrity of other systems. Those kind of issues are played out in the day-to-day situation. So in drug development, it's not good. But in the clinic, to some extent, it helps. It also often gives better benefits to the patients when they draw on both the systems. In research, it's 50-50. We have to wait to see how these things are going to pan out.
Mm. Okay, so my final question today is, what are the particular challenges that are facing Ayurveda and Siddha in the 21st century?
I think one of the largest issue is ensuring the quality of the drugs. The reason is that Ayurveda and Siddha, they, as systems of medicine, they draw on herbs, minerals, and animal products, metals, but the predominantly herbal ingredients are many. So unlike biomedicine, which is based on synthetic chemicals that can be industrially mass produced, these systems of medicine cannot be upscaled to an unlimited level. One of the problems of globalization is that how will you consume Ayurvedic drugs in Europe or US? Only by converting them into tablets, and they have to be mass produced industrially. Now, proprietary medicines are also used in India. But I think this is a very this is not a very happy development. Because, like I already mentioned, the proprietary drugs their character as drugs are dubious, and they may not be effective. So the proprietary, so they need. There is some attention needed there. They are now becoming very popular. Second, and more important, is that since these medicines draw from herbal resources, they cannot be organized industrially in the same way as allopathy is. Biomedical drugs are. They have to be scaled in small-scale production, and they have to draw upon regional ecology to be able to allow the variation and to be sustainable. In India, more than 80% of the raw ingredients, herbs, are harvested from the wild. Unlike China, where they are cultivated. Now, mindless harvesting of these herbs can lead to extinction. And so this will not be sustainable if we follow the same model of biomedicine, which is, most governments tend to think that upscaling, just bring the industry in, let them mass harvest the herbs and mass produce. I don't think that's going to be the right path. So there should be few big industries. Okay, that's fine. Let them be there, but there should be no need industrial, but bulk production, which is sustainable, which is mindful of the quality of the herbs. Because one is sustainability, second is the quality of the drugs have to be regulated. Substitutes should not be should be used carefully, and so this is one of the very big issues, challenges that is these systems of medicine are facing. They should not be just mechanically introduced. This industrial system should not be inserted. So it's not just the medicine, but also the economic and social organization, that matters. And I want to mention to you something that both my Indian informants and European Ayurveda practitioners said, that the best, if we want to develop Ayurveda, the way it, according to its own principles, then you follow the Ayurvedic principles of pharmacology, etc., but apply it to herbs locally. So maybe Europe and America would use the Ayurvedic principles, the European Ayurveda practitioners, and use the herbs found in Europe. Similarly, in India and different parts, the northeast of India has very different kinds of herbs. These principles, and then medicines be made regionally and on a smaller scale, and trying to fit one thing for everyone. So the principles are same, practices and infra, there can be same, but the ingredients, there will be some creativity and originality. That is how Ayurveda spread throughout South Asia also. So maybe it might be worthwhile to consider an alternative, not just in medicine, but also in social and economic, organizational way of doing it.
Yeah, that's great. We look forward to seeing those developments, particularly in the post-COVID-19 world as well. So thank you very much for your time today, Professor.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Nice meeting you.
And you. Thank you.